Before we dig in, a quick thank you to the sponsors ready to grow with the Soil Sisters. Tejas Tonic is the official beverage of the Texas Soil Sisters. We especially love that the hemp for Tejas Tonic is organically farmed in the Texas Hill Country, with farms in both Dripping Springs and Lukenbach, Texas. The Soil Sisters podcast is powered by B&P Electric. Whether you're building, remodeling, installing low-voltage landscape lighting, or in need of an inspection, B&P is your Central Texas electrical contractor. Find links to our sponsors in the podcast show notes or head over to txsoilsisters.co. You're listening to the Soil Sisters podcast, where we dig in on family farming and ranching, regenerative agriculture, healthy living, and planting seeds in our community. We invite you to listen, subscribe, and grow with the Soil Sisters. I'm Joanna Newting, joined by my blood, soul, and soil sister, Crystal. Welcome to the show.
Hi, sister.
Hello.
I'm very excited about our guest today.
Yes, and I don't know if everyone can hear the sounds of nature around us, but we're at the magnificent Swift River Pecans with the one and only Troy Swift.
Yes, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me on the podcast. I've been looking forward to it.
Yay.
Well, we've been wanting to have you on the show for a long time, so when Crystal reached back out again and you immediately booked something, and I'm like, I wonder what day that's on. And I'm like, oh, shoot, that's this week. Let's go.
I love it. You were literally on the list before we started the podcast of who are the important guests, and your name was at the top of that list. So I'm really pleased to have you here today.
Well, I'm glad you perceived me that way, and I'm looking forward to having a discussion about what we're doing in regenerative ag and in the pecan industry.
Wonderful.
Yes. So, Troy, you've been at this pecan growing game for how many years now?
I bought my first farm in 1998, which is near Staples, Texas. And then I bought this farm, which is near Fentress, Texas, in 2004. I didn't buy these farms to go into the pecan business. I bought the farms because they were on the San Marcos River, and I wanted to live on the San Marcos River because before this, as a younger man, I was a canoer and kayaker. And there was a place over by Staples, Texas, that in 1998, I canoed by it, and I looked at it, and I said, if I could ever afford a place like that, I would buy it.
Yes.
20 years later, I bought it.
You bought the place.
The place.
Yes.
There were several up and down the river that I had spotted over the years, but that was the first one, and it just as things turn out, that's the one I bought. And it had an old pecan orchard on it. That's how I got into pecan farming. It had a lot of native pecans, giant old ancient trees like we're looking at here, but it also had an old orchard on it of the variety Mahan and Delmas, which we think was probably planted around somewhere between the 1920s and 1940s.
Wow.
And I didn't know anything about pecan farming, but my wife and I were down in that orchard year after we bought it, and there was pecans everywhere, and we said, well, I guess we're going to have to learn how to be pecan farmers.
There you go.
Well, and we're so glad you did.
Yeah, so what is the lifespan of a pecan tree?
Well, natives, I guess we don't really know the answer, but we believe, and I've had this verified by scientists, that many of these old pecan trees can be 250 to 300 years old, maybe even a little bit older.
Amazing.
Which adds a great history lesson to even coming down into these native pecan bottoms, which is what areas where native pecan trees typically grow on the floodplain side of a river on the inside of a bend. Those are called pecan bottoms. The interesting thing is some of these trees that we think are around 300 years old, you can look at that tree and say the Comanches probably ate pecans off of that tree.
Yes.
Not that tree's parents, but that tree. And so they were here. Some of these were here during the Texas Revolution. you can read books about Texas history where pecan trees were places where battles occurred. And in one reading I did where the grape shot from the cannons was actually going through the trees and pecans were raining down on the soldiers.
Wow.
And they were eating them as they were laying down, in battle.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I like to point that out, that a lot of history and a lot of Texas history revolves around this area, this Caldwell County area. And also, these trees were there for much of that history.
Yes.
One of the things that I heard you say before is that you have 27 years of different experiences as a pecan farmer. And I like that because it's always different. Things are always changing. We always have to adapt. And instead of just saying, well, I've been doing this for 50 years, you are acknowledging that they're like snowflakes. No 2 years are the same, right?
Oh, that's a fact. That saying is not my saying. I've heard that from other farmers too, that they have, in my case, 27 years of different experiences. Farming is hard, and the weather plays a major role in that. The weather is never the same from one year to the next. We have what we call normal temperatures and normal rainfall, but really here, and probably in most places, averages are made of extremes.
Yeah.
So right here where we're sitting in the floodplain of the San Marcos River, but not on the lower part of it, I've seen this slab that we're sitting on be underwater 4 times since I've owned this property. And we've also seen several of the worst droughts in Texas history in just the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. So the experiences are quite variable. The reaction of the trees, the plants, the animals, Mother Nature in general is quite variable and reactive to whatever the weather presents.
Yeah.
So it's 27 different years of different experiences. Yeah.
All right. So out of those 27 years, when did you say, I need to get on board this regenerative ag train?
Well, what really changed my mind about agriculture, and I was trained in conventional pecan farming, and I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't had that training. There's a lot of valuable training in conventional pecan farming, but what happened was I had a group of trees, my Sioux variety, that around 19 or 20 started to go into decline, and some of them actually died. And so I called the scientists and I said, come look at my trees. What is wrong with my trees? And the answer was, we don't know. There must be something wrong with the soil or something wrong with the rootstock. And I said, well, I can't change the rootstock, and I'm not going to cut the tree down and start over. So maybe it's the soil. So I started studying soil. And I also started studying cover crops, and I made a call to some scientists and kept calling them and saying, what about this cover crop? What about that cover crop? No, it won't work. It's too hot in Texas. No, it won't work for this reason or that. And finally, one of those guys said, you know what? You need to call Dennis Purrs. I said, who's that? He says, he's a regenerative pecan farmer up in Georgetown. And just go see what he's doing. Well, I did. And I didn't know Dennis Purrs. He's older than me. And he invited me up, and I got out of the car on the perimeter of his orchard, and right when I got out, and this was in August, by the way, when the trees are stressed as bad as they're going to be with heat and drought, I got out of the car, I looked at his trees, I looked at the ground cover, I walked through his orchard because he was in the barn, and I still hadn't met him, and before I even met him, I looked at this orchard, I said, there's something going on good here. And fortunately, he's a person that's willing to share his knowledge and skills, and he literally had a big piece of paper in his a flip chart's what I'm trying to say, in his barn with what he had done. And he introduced me to soil biology and mineral balancing and his advisors, such as Betsy Ross and Steve Diver and people like that. And I really changed my study direction into soil life, cover crops, plant nutrition, soil performance, and then continued to this day reading more things such as books about the rhizophagy cycle. And now I've even read something about easy exclusion zone water, not easy as in the other way, exclusion zone water. So I keep opening my mind to new concepts. I don't always just accept them right off the bat, but my approach is to be open-minded enough to at least consider the possibility that some of these concepts could be beneficial, and then I try to validate them by taking data and using data to convince myself and others that some of these ideas that I used to consider radical might actually be good, legitimate agricultural practices.
I love that about you, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that you're a first-generation farmer, and you haven't been indoctrinated with a bunch of ideas, which allows you to pivot quicker.
Yeah.
Do you agree, or is that just who you are as a human?
Both. But really, I do have a distinct advantage is that I don't have old family paradigms that I grew up with to begin with, and then I don't have anybody I have to convince except me.
Yeah.
So I do have that luxury, and in fact, I also use that even kind of as a marketing thing, because a lot of my other pecan farmers I know, good pecan farmers, will start the conversation by saying they're fourth or fifth generation. And I always start mine by going, no, I'm first generation.
Yes.
So, there are advantages to being a fourth or fifth generation. The equipment exists already. A lot of the know-how and the how to run it, how to fix it, all that already exists. But with me, it was all new. But that was exciting.
Yeah.
But it does give me a distinct advantage when it comes to making decisions and making changes and then measuring them to see if they work or not.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and it's so important to be able to make the moves that you know you want to make. And that's one thing that we have been learning as beginning farmers is, and you know what, I'm not sad that we did it. When we planted our first hemp crop, we did what they told us to do. We had our own ideas, but they knew better. And so we did what they did. And now we know we've done it that way, and now we're going to do it our way. And so it's wonderful, but I love that you're just free out of the gate to change your mind and do what you want.
Well, I was the same way. I mean, I did what I was taught. Some of it worked, and some of it I had a bad gut feel about it. For instance, spraying herbicide.
Yeah.
Herbicide, fungicide, or insecticide. I knew I needed to do it. At least I was taught I needed to do it, but I always felt like it was wrong.
Yeah.
When I would look back at the sprayer, I would go, Troy, you love where you live. You love the nature that surrounds you. You always have, and now you're spraying poison. Why are you doing that? Is it really worth it? Well, so one side of you as a farmer says, well, yes, of course it's worth it. You have to have a crop. You need to make money.
Yeah.
You have to produce a crop, and if you don't, you've been told you will fail. So that's pretty scary. Even for a first-generation farmer, that's pretty scary. But on the other hand, when I started studying the soil dynamics and understanding the plants better and going into the regenerative science, I also learned that there can be other ways you can control pests, more natural ways, and so I started adopting those methods and eliminating, or at least attempting to eliminate, the conventional pesticides.
Amen. Well, when I found out that the higher the sugar content of your plant, then the bugs they don't have a pancreas, they can't process that sugar, it turns to alcohol and it'll kill them. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, great. Let's increase the sugar content in our plants. That just seems to be
So
seems logical.
bricks, which is what you're talking about, is one of the things that we're studying and trying to achieve. It's harder to do and measure than some people lead on to.
Yeah.
The example I give you is as I have a refractometer and I check things, but to get the bricks reading out of a pecan leaf in the summertime is nearly impossible.
I can imagine.
You just can't get a drop out of it to put on the refractometer. So it's very hard to do. On the other hand, though, when you treat your soil right, it should be doing that naturally. If you have a good, healthy soil microbiome and good cover crops, no exposed soil, and you're working with the 6 principles of soil health, the bricks should be getting higher in the plants. And even if you can't measure it, you can observe your trees and say, hey, look, you know what? I don't really have an aphid problem. I don't really have a mite problem.
Yeah.
Which is some of those arthropods that we worry about, especially relative to bricks. So something's making those bugs not want to be here.
Exactly.
And but gathering bricks data is pretty hard on pecan leaves.
Nowadays, finding time for in real life connection is a challenge in and of itself. So, I talked to Crystal about a modern spin on the classic farmers co op, and we'd be delighted if you join us. The concept is pretty simple: give $5, receive support. You donate $5 or more per month and gain access to the Texas Soil Sisters Co op monthly online meetup. This is a private but open dialogue where you can bring questions and receive support from our growing community. Maybe it's questions about industrial hemp production, or you're looking for land, or maybe a land steward, or connecting with alternative land use opportunities. Maybe you're in the beginning stage of off ramping from conventional ag like we are. We love passing along the powerful education we're receiving and helping other soil sisters and misters like you find solutions. So, if you're a gardener, land steward, farmer, rancher, or limited resource landowner, you're invited to join us on our monthly co op call with your donation. Sign up at txsoilsisters.co/grow. These monthly meetings are not recorded. They take place on the third Monday of every month at 6 p.m. Central Time. Sign up at txsoilsisters.co/grow. So let's talk about some of these other pests and how you're naturally fending them off of your orchard.
Well, there's several main pests in pecan farming. The absolute worst one from I-35 all the way to the Atlantic Ocean is pecan scab, which is a fungus. And the further east you go, the worse it gets. That's why the pecan industry largely has moved to the desert. That's why El Paso and the Mesilla Valley of New Mexico and northern Mexico are now the largest pecan producing areas in the world, is because they're in the desert. And as long as you can keep a pecan tree's roots wet, the leaves like it to be hot and dry, and so they don't have fungus, and they can grow higher yielding varieties out there that we can't grow here. But here it's a real problem. And so instead of using the conventional fungicides as we were taught, I've decided to, in light of trying to not damage the soil microbiome, which is largely fungal, by the way, in light of trying to not damage it, I'm trying to not use as many fungicides. So we are using now a bacteria that we spray on the trees instead of fungicide. We do it at the same time. In fact, just after bud break, we'll do our first one. And what that does is it makes the tree think it's being attacked by a pathogen, but it's not a bacteria that hurts the tree. And what that causes is what's called systemic acquired resistance, where the tree is able to build its self-defense system so that when the real pathogen comes along, the tree's ready to fight. And I've been doing experiments with that now for 2 years. The first year it was a little too dry to get good data, but last year was a real good year to do it. And we, that along with using some new fungicides, they are actually fungicides, but there's some new organic ones with an FRAC of BMO1, which is an organic tea tree oil, rotating that in with the bacteria, and also applications of potassium silicate, which builds cell wall thickness and makes a good strong cell wall, along with calcium. People think you're crazy for spraying calcium when we're so high in calcium to begin with, but plant available calcium is also good for cell wall structure. And essentially what we're trying to do is build a cell wall that's so strong and so thick that a fungal hyphae or mite or aphid proboscis can't penetrate into the cell. So last year we did quite a bit of study on that. I documented everything with pictures and dates and spray dates and cost and the whole works, and presented it to the Texas Pecan Growers Association. And, you know, I wouldn't say it's accepted by everybody, but it's one of those things where if we can open somebody's mind to these new techniques, we're going to make advancements in soil health and good regenerative agriculture.
I love that. And you're the president of the Texas Pecan Growers Association.
I am the president of the Texas Pecan Growers Association.
How lucky they are and that Texas is to have you.
Well, thank you. I was a little nervous about this, you know, standing up in front of a whole electorate of mostly conventional pecan farmers, but I tell you, the industry is changing.
Yeah.
First of all, they didn't run me out of the hotel, but more so, even at the at our Texas Pecan Growers Convention and the Western Pecan Growers Convention in Las Cruces that I attended a couple of weeks ago, we're seeing a lot more regenerative type vendors there that are trying to market soil health products, mycorrhizal fungi, this type of bacteria I was talking about. There's a real effort, a real change in the industry that I like, and people are really starting to be interested in it, and they want to hear about it. And there's a good reason for that. The reason is we can't afford to farm the old way. We can't spray by the calendar. We can't just fertilize by the calendar anymore. We need to test and do the right kind of applications at the right time. But we now have more options. Part of the reason that regenerative agriculture is changing, beyond the fact that people are eager for new opportunities, is there is now science that supports a lot of these new ideas, and we know more than we used to. For instance, let's talk about soil microbiome. You know, now we have testing for it that we either didn't have or wasn't economically viable, say, 10 years ago. The Haney soil test, the PLFA, there's now DNA analysis that's being done and things like that. So we now have technical capability that we didn't used to, that we need to take advantage of, and that's going to lead us into a more regenerative farming mindset. But you know what? The funny thing is, it's taking us back to what Mother Nature was doing forever.
Exactly.
Crystal and I are working on a grant proposal right now, and there's, I'm like, okay, we have to focus on one or two things. Look through this list, tell me. And one of them was talking about advancements in
innovation.
And she's like, if doing it like they did 100 years ago is innovation, then this is us. Because when you get down to the root of it, it truly is going back to the old ways.
Well, and if you want to use technology to measure biology. Like, stop with all the, chemical advancements or whatever and all the things that they want to use all the stuff for. I'm like, great, use all that stuff. But what I want you to do is measure the biology in the soil and the things that are actually going to move the needle on our soil health and the health of all the stuff we try to grow.
So I didn't finish answering the question you asked about what I'm doing
I was going to circle back still,
Okay.
so you're good, but keep going.
All right. So another major component of regenerative agriculture is biodiversity. If you have a biodiverse, in my case, okay, in a pecan orchard, if you have a biodiverse orchard floor, then you have a place where beneficial insects can live. The argument, of course, is, well, you also have a place for bad insects and bad arthropods to live. That's true too, but nature has a way of balancing the populations of all life, actually. And so if you have a good biodiverse orchard floor, then the natural system is working, and that causes biodiversity to expand in all aspects, below the soil, on the soil level, all of the plants that are in the orchard floor and their functions, such as making flowers for all sorts of insects and other arthropods, beneficials that we like, such as parasitic wasp, need in order to do their job of parasitizing pests that we have. You know, there's a good podcast by Joe Lewis that he was the guest, talking about parasitoid wasp, and that there's a lot of beneficials that you can even buy and put in your system.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you buy that beneficial insect, the female will go lay an egg on something she's parasitizing, but then she needs to eat something. Yeah. And they don't eat bugs, they eat nectar.
Mm-hmm.
And so if she does her job and then looks around and goes, I need to eat, and there's nothing on the orchard floor because we killed it all, then she has to fly away. So you don't get any more benefit from that beneficial insect.
She's like, somebody dropped me off in a food desert.
Yeah,
what's happening
that's
here?
exactly right. So
what are my kids going to do?
But that biodiversity goes all the way from soil microorganisms up to major animals like deer and, larger animals. But two animals that we like a lot in our orchards are birds and bats.
Yes.
And we call the birds the day shift. We call the bats the night shift.
I like it.
And birds are here. People are familiar with birds because they fly in the daytime and you see them and you hear them like the ones we're hearing right now. That's good. Bats are different. Bats are mysterious. A lot of people are afraid of bats, which is unfounded, by the way. And you don't hardly ever see a bat unless you're looking for them.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times the only experience somebody has with a bat might be that it got in a building or there's a sick one or something. And yes, you don't want to mess with those. That's not a good idea. But you also wouldn't go mess with a sick raccoon or a sick dog either, would you?
Exactly.
So people have an unreasonable fear of bats, but what really, they do such great work for agriculture. They eat tons and tons and tons of insects and other arthropods. And so what we did was work with Merlin Tuttle and Merlin Tuttle's Bat Conservation to install bat houses in our orchards and then proceed to study them. And we did several experiments and still are doing several experiments. And one is we used two different designs of bat houses, two different designs, half of them painted, half of them not painted, to decide whether they had a particular bat house design or whether they liked them painted or unpainted. We don't think that color matters, but how sealed up they are.
Mm-hmm.
The paint seals them up. But then we also expanded the experiment into what are they eating? So that means now I've turned into somebody that actually collects guano.
Yes.
Now, 15 years ago, I worked in the jet engine business and did Excel spreadsheets and capacity planning and all kinds of things like that. Now I've graduated to collecting guano and never saw myself doing that either. So there's another major change.
Yes.
And now we send it to a lab called Species from Feces, and they tell us what those bats are eating. They tell us also the species of the bat. So we now know that we have evening bats, which are forest bats, and we also have Brazilian freetails, which most people know as Mexican freetails, living in our bat houses. and we also know what they eat. And the interesting thing is that they eat a great deal of beetles of all sorts. They also eat a lot of Hempiptera, which is the stink bug family, including the green stink bug, which is pretty damaging to almost all agriculture that has fruits.
On my tomatoes.
Yeah. And but they also eat, and this is important for people that aren't even interested in agriculture. They eat a lot of mosquitoes, and they eat different species of mosquitoes, of which do carry the bad diseases like Zika and West Nile and things like that. This is also important for other agriculture, such as cattle, because in this guano, the DNA shows that we've discovered cattle DNA in the guano, which probably indicates that the bat ate a mosquito or a fly or something that was bothering a cow. Mm-hmm. So that means it's important to the cattle industry. And then as I go through these spreadsheets and I see insect, mammal, and then it came to cattle, and then it came to Homo sapien. And I went, huh? Mm-hmm. So maybe it was a mosquito that bit me.
Yeah.
Or somebody else. Mm-hmm. But it could also...
it was probably me.
Well,
I'm like feasting season. I'm like, we're surrounding my house with bat houses when I get home.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's really incredible the work they do. And we want to promote bats in agriculture.
The other thing you mentioned that they ate that I think is important for people to know too is termites was another one big on that, right? Wasn't termites on that spreadsheet?
Yes.
And we have this area of the ranch where, I mean, termites just will wipe out
the grass.
Yeah. So
okay. Bat houses.
Here's what's on a bat's diet. If it flies, it dies.
Excellent.
So if you get winged ants, you get termites that get up into the air. They're going to eat them.
So what bat house?
Yeah,
what was
did
the
they
consensus? Like? Which one did they like best?
They like them. They like them all.
Okay, I like it. That's great.
They like them all. Now these are genuine Merlin Tuttle designed bat boxes.
Okay.
So there is some science and history behind them, and we build them out of Pecky cypress, which became available here because of the 2015 floods that wiped out the cypress trees on the Blanco River and deposited them down here. We have our own sawmills and kilns and woodworking equipment, so we took his designs and built them out of cypress, which is very rot resistant, which is another good reason to use it. They use all of them. I monitored guano yesterday at one of my farms. We have 8 bat houses, and we had occupancy in all 8 to some degree or the other. At this farm, we had occupancy in about 4 out of the 8. But here's what happens. Those bats, right now, they're kind of spread out. But we've learned over the last few years, they will eventually accumulate into 1 or 2 of those boxes per farm. And the most we've seen in a box so far is 271.
Whoa, how big are these boxes?
Well, I mean, they're 4 feet. One of them's 4 feet tall by about 9 inches wide or so.
Wow.
Bats only weigh between 10 and 20 grams generally, these kind of bats. There's other bats in other parts of the world that are much bigger than that.
Yeah.
But our Mexican freetails and our evening bats are 10 to 20 grams usually. We also live in the land of the red bat. We're down in the pecan bottom here. Red bats live in pecan trees and other trees too, and they won't go in a house. So they're harder to study because they're more individual and they don't accumulate in houses. But we do an event here called Join the Nightlife in September. That's a Merlin Tuttle Bat Conservation's education program where a lot of scientists and very elaborate equipment with microphones and computers and listening devices can tell us what's flying around. We have 7 species that live here.
I love that.
We wouldn't have known this. I wouldn't have known this a few years ago.
Yeah.
So the Cliff's Notes, is it if you build it, they will come?
And if it flies, they'll eat it.
Yeah, I mean, so.
The Cliff Notes on the houses is if you build it, they might come. And we have had great success here. We're also experimenting in other parts of the state. We've put these bat houses in 6 other counties in South Texas, and they've all been inhabited to one degree or the other. And we've also put one at Belding Farms, and we put two in Belding Farms in Fort Stockton, which is just about being in the desert.
Mm-hmm.
And I was out there last week, and they've had occupancy there too. They have a different species though. They have a cave myotis species of bat that's inhabiting theirs, and we have found pecan pests in their diet out there.
Wonderful.
So I think the opportunity is very large that bats can be used to a much more productive manner in agriculture if farmers just knew about it. Yeah. And the same thing for city managers and people that have parks. I mean, nobody likes to be bitten by mosquitoes.
Exactly.
Yeah. I was telling y'all earlier, they ruin about half of my year. Crystal carries a lavender around with her everywhere. I stay eaten up and then look like I have some sort of a disease because then I have these bites that don't go away for months. Yeah. I'm just
They don't bother me.
They don't bother me either.
I can be bitten 20 times in 30 minutes. I don't know that I've been bitten.
I'm sweet. She's spicy.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
Well, they just generally don't like me. I seldom have a mosquito problem, but I'm lucky that way.
All right. I want to get into some of the nerdy soil health stuff that you talk about. So before we started this podcast, we got a little Troy Swift lesson in everything he's been doing. So one of the things you mentioned was systemic acquired resistance and induced systemic resistance. Put that in layman's terms for me.
In layman's terms, it's like the plant being vaccinated against some kind of a disease. So those two things are slightly different scientifically, but to a farmer, they're essentially the same thing. It's a way of making the plant's immune system stronger and ready for attack by pathogen or insect, and its ability to fight them off is higher because it's a healthy plant.
So that's when you put that bacteria on your pecan trees. That's what this is.
That's right.
Okay.
That's an attempt to induce systemic acquired resistance, which, as I've studied it, and I think this is right, is that the systemic acquired resistance is generally acquired through the leaves in the phyllosphere, and ISR, induced systemic resistance, usually something that comes up through the soil. The bottom line, though, is if you have a healthy ecosystem and a healthy soil ecosystem, then your trees stand a much better chance than if they're living only on man-supplied nutrients.
Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, the biodiversity under the ground is so immense. I think I've read or heard several times that only about 5% of the organisms have even been identified.
Exactly.
And so there's no telling what biochemical actions are going on in the rhizosphere, which is the area right around the root. Even what organisms are being consumed by the plant in what's called the rhizophagy cycle. And the energy and water and carbon cycles that are going on in the soil and in the orchard floor is very complex. So the bottom line is everything I have studied brings me back to soil health.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so there's a trick question. A lot of times you'll go to a field day or a farm show or something, and somebody will stand up and say, "What's your most limiting nutrient?" Well, almost everybody will say nitrogen or phosphorus, or sometimes a real smart one will say manganese or some micronutrient. But the real answer is usually water.
Yeah.
The real answer is usually water. So none of those fertilizers, none of that stuff you can buy can work if you don't have water.
Yeah.
And so we all know that Texas and the Southwest United States is facing very serious water issues. So is Mexico. So what I'm doing is using soil health and one attribute of it, particularly soil organic matter, as a countermeasure to drought.
Amen.
I like to use that word countermeasure because people understand it militarily that, if you're being attacked in a submarine or a jet or something, you eject countermeasures to try to fend off whatever's attacking you. Well, I think we're going to be under attack for water in our part of the state from several different threats. One is simply the weather. We go into these horrible droughts, and then we go into wet periods. But these droughts, in my 27 years, it seems like it's getting drier all the time with a few intermittent floods. But the weather is a problem, and we're just not going to have enough water. But of course, there's development in the area, just incredible development in our area, and it's not just us. We like to make it sound like it's worse here than everywhere else. But everywhere you go, you see development. All of those apartments, all of those businesses, all of those things all have water requirements that are coming out of a limited supply. And then there's the threat of regulation. So even those that have adequate water now will probably face regulation on pumping and irrigation in the future. So what are we going to do about that? Well, we need to do conservation techniques. We need to do planning, and all of those things are happening. Maybe not as good as they should be, but they're happening. But what can I do? Well, what I can do is treat my soil right and increase my organic matter so that I have a higher water holding capacity in the soil. So when it does rain, I keep it. Yeah. Not only do I keep it, I keep whatever's in the soil. And if you have 100% ground cover, you have continuous living roots, that increases the permeability of your soil. It also prevents runoff and leaching, and so that the fertilizers that you do have, the minerals that you do have, are not washing into the river. So that's a drought control measure that any farmer can do, is increase the organic matter of their soil so that when it does rain, you get to keep it. You get to keep more of it longer.
Yes. And, as you're talking about this, and you'll talk about the orchard floor, I will still see in my mind our drive home to West Texas, where you have these farms that have been replaced with solar panels and things like that. And there's not a lot happening underneath them. Some people I'm starting to see, they're allowing things to grow, but you don't have an orchard, but you're doing something like that. It's still, you have to have a diverse ecosystem, because when it starts pouring down rain in those areas, the roadways just completely flood. So,
and it's mud. It looks like you might be driving across a river of mud.
So yeah, it does. You don't have to have an orchard to need to use these exact same concepts.
Exactly.
No, all land needs that, because that, in many places, that water is what recharges aquifers.
Yes.
If it runs off into the river or down the road, it's not recharging an aquifer. It's recharging into the ocean, maybe, but not the aquifer.
Well, and it's taking all the topsoil with it.
That's right. And that's another issue. There's a topsoil crisis in all of agricultural lands, and that's a worldwide issue, which is another good reason to be using the regenerative agriculture soil principles, is to stop the erosion and to rebuild the organic matter of the soil. Now, another way to do that, and another way we are doing that, is that we're spraying biologicals onto the orchard floor, and we're using algae. And I never would have thought about doing this a few years ago, but we are using an algae now as an addition to the soil microbiome. And then probably one of the most exciting things we did was we built our own Johnson Sioux bioreactors. And if you don't know what a Johnson Sioux bioreactor is, look that up on the internet. You can build them. They're cheap, they're easy, and they can use just about any organic material you have. And in my case, it's wood chips and wood waste, because we have a lot of trees and we have sawmills and a lot of wood waste. So it's a natural way to convert high organic material into high fungal to bacterial ratio compost, super compost. We've had it tested. And the interesting thing about it is it takes about a year, but you don't have to turn it. It's totally passive, except that you need to water it every day. So we water ours 1 minute a day. if you do this, put an automatic timer on there. There's no way you're going to go water something 1 minute a day. It's not going to happen. Put it on an automatic timer. And then in a year, it is an amazing compost. You can grab a handful of it or a shovel full of it, and it looks like compost. It smells like compost. A lot of times it has earthworms in it that we didn't even put in it. Mm-hmm. They somehow found it and even crossed over the space of a pallet to get into it. That's how good it is. Even the earthworms want to do it.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to spend money on it. It was waste off of your land.
Exactly.
Just your initial build, which is cheap. But here's the fine thing about it. You put it in a bucket and it dissolves. Yeah. It dissolves. Mm-hmm. It's not like compost that you would put in a bucket and it floats and there's big pieces and all that. If you let it mature, it dissolves. And then you can filter off what doesn't dissolve, which is, there's always something that doesn't. But about 90 or 95% of it dissolves. It's amazing. And what does that mean? That means you can put it in a ground rig and you can spray it.
Yes.
You can spray it on your orchard floor. This is highly biodiverse compost extract. It's not tea. You're not brewing it. You're not adding food and air and everything to it. It's called extract. And you literally just go spray it on the orchard floor, or I'm going to start a new test where I'm actually spraying it on the orchard floor and shanking it in so that we actually deliver it to the soil profile without tearing up the grass. Mm-hmm. I mean, a little line will get torn up.
Yeah.
But,
and then with the sprayer going in right behind it.
And then the liquid coming in, the shank actually has the liquid tube on it.
Oh, yeah.
So as soon as it cuts the ground, the liquid's going into the ground.
Okay, I want to see.
And I just bought the parts for that, and I learned about that in California from a pistachio grower named Richard Philippe, who's doing a lot of the same things I'm doing, except he's doing it in California, and he's in a very challenging situation. Central California, the San Joaquin Valley, is very conservative when it comes to agriculture. He's kind of like me. He's trying to change things, and he's somebody y'all might want to talk to someday.
Yeah,
I like it.
Texted his name to Joanna already.
So speaking of diversity, you know, like most farmers, you can't just do one thing anymore and make a living as a farmer. So in all of these years, as you've transitioned from the typical pecan orchard situation to you've created a regenerative farm out here, you've also diversified what you're doing in your business. Can you just describe that a little bit to everyone about the different verticals that you have now and how it's serving the whole business?
Yes. So one of the biggest changes was when I started, and when I started my orchards that I planted, which was about 1,200 trees, had not come into production yet. So I was harvesting native pecans and custom harvesting other people's pecans, and I didn't have a retail store. So everything was sold into the commercial market by the 18-wheeler. And there were good years in there. When China came into the market, in the early 2000s, pecan prices got pretty high, and we could make money doing that. But, of course, China's not so much in the market anymore, and pecan prices, especially natives, have gone down to where they're not profitable to pick up. So in the meantime, my orchards came into production, and I opened a retail shop, and I continue to sell more and more pecans retail and less wholesale. In fact, last year I didn't sell any wholesale. And one way you can do that, regenerative agriculture is good for the soil and good for the earth and environment. People want that. Customers want to know that they're eating a healthy food. They want to know where it's coming from. This is another aspect of the change in regenerative agriculture, is the customer base appreciates this. And anyway, so we've developed our retail business, and the idea is you have to grow a really high quality pecan if you're going to sell it retail. If people buy a bad pecan from you, they're not going to come back and they're going to talk bad about you. You have to sell high-quality pecans. So that's one way. So I've consolidated almost entirely from commodities to selling retail. Now, there's different ways to sell pecans. You can sell them in the shell, but if you do, they better be good. You can also sell halves and pieces. So we installed pecan shelling equipment, which is a pretty capital intense purchase, but we installed the entire pecan shelling system and now can sell halves and pieces. We can also sell them cracked. Sometimes people just like to buy cracked pecans. A lot of times people like to sit around the fire or on the porch and crack pecans. So we sell them cracked. But there's more to it than that. We also make pecan oil. Now, pecan oil, a lot of people haven't heard about, but it's lower in saturated fat than olive oil, and it has a higher smoke point. It has a 407 degree smoke point. So it's really easy to cook with. But here's the deal. It's good on everything. It's good for salads. It's good for fish. It's good to put on your toast. It's good to put on ice cream. Mm-hmm. When I heard that, I said, put it on ice cream. And a chef told me about that. He says, well, don't you like pecans on your ice cream? Yeah. I said, well, sure. I said, in fact, I've done experiments. It's impossible to put too many pecans on a bowl of ice cream. You can't do it. But it's just good for you. It's good, healthy food. And it's just, pecans are a very high oil content. And so a lot of what you're eating when you eat a pecan and what you're liking is the oil. Mm-hmm. So we're doing that. And then on the other side of the business where we have all these giant trees that fall down in storms, and sometimes they just fall down because they want to, but we take those into our sawmills, and we have very large sawmills that can cut logs up to 65 inches in diameter. And we saw them into lumber or slabs, such as you would make a bar top out of, or a big table, things of that nature, or lumber to make cabinets out of, or people make everything out of lumber. We sell kiln-dried pecan lumber and other local woods, and we don't cut down trees. We only take what Mother Nature knocks down, and we also custom sawmill for other people. If you have a log you want cut, you can bring it to us, and we can cut it and dry it and plane it. And what sets us apart from your average person that has a portable sawmill is ours is in a controlled factory. We have kilns, we have big saws, and we have big planers and woodworking equipment, so we can handle very big wood that most other people can't. So we've tried to vertically integrate on just about everything the pecan tree can do. We don't throw away anything. If the wood is too small to make lumber out of, we make firewood out of it. If it's too small to make firewood out of it, we grind it up and make wood chips and put it back on the orchard floor, which helps build organic material very, very well. And not only that, when we made our Johnson Sioux bioreactors, that was with wood chips. So the fungus we're putting on the orchard floor is used to eating wood.
Yes.
So now we come along and put our waste chips on there, and there's some more wood for them to eat, and then they create more biomass.
Absolutely. Feed the microbes.
Just trying to close the circle here.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what advice do you have for people? Our cousin and her husband have a pecan orchard on the property that they had bought, and a lot of them were dead. They've had a lot of issues, disease and whatnot. So someone who's trying to transition from conventional care of a pecan orchard or just an orchard in general, what are those first steps that they would take to move into the regenerative method?
Well, the first steps in establishing any pecan orchard, whether regenerative, organic, or conventional, is to make sure you have the right soil. Pecan trees are river bottom trees. They're used to deep, well-drained soil, and they take a lot of water. So if you start out in a place doesn't have good deep soil, you're at a great disadvantage to begin with. But assuming that you are, and you have an old orchard that is in trouble, I would start with analyzing the water and doing Haney soil tests and PLFAs and see what's going on with the soil. You also have to test your water. You need to make sure you have low SAR, sodium absorption ratio water. And there's just some general conditions that have to exist before a pecan orchard will really be successful under any circumstances. if you're going to establish a new orchard, and this is key in regenerative agriculture of no matter what you're growing, there are a lot of varieties of pecan trees. That's true of other crops too. I mean, there's a lot of varieties of apples and squash and everything else. Pick a variety that is suited to your area. This is a major problem that people have. They want one they heard about somewhere else. It's not going to grow here, okay? So pick one that's suitable for your area. And in today's world, in the pecan industry, I like to plant the variety Kanza, Kanza, very scab resistant, which is, remember, is one of our major pests.
Nice.
I didn't even get to the other pests, but we're probably running out of time. But the bats take care of the pecan case bearer. That's what we want them to do. But plant disease-resistant varieties. That'll help you get started in the right way. Build organic matter in the soil. If you don't want to play with the soil science, remember, it all comes back to water, and it all comes back to healthy soil. After that, you can play with the little knobs, like what fertilizer to use or what biostimulant to use or something like that. But healthy soil and good water are fundamental.
So do you consider this method, does it take more time or less time than when you did it conventionally? Because that's the thing everybody says they don't have enough of is time. So what is that to you?
I think time-wise, they're probably comparable. You still have to do things in the orchard. The good thing about the regenerative method is you can probably get away with a little less management the healthier your soil gets, the less critical it is because your trees are not addicted to the fertilizer. Okay.
Yep.
There's more buffering is the word everybody likes to use, right? Gives you a little tolerance. The great thing about regenerative agriculture and the way I'm doing it in my orchards is I've eliminated mowing almost. We mow one time a year. Well, that's down from 5 or 6 times a year. Major cost savings, major labor savings, major time savings. Probably time-wise it's comparable, but here's the other part of it. The time you do spend in the orchard with a highly biodiverse orchard floor is much more enjoyable.
Yes.
Yeah.
When you're living amongst the other creatures that want to live in your orchard just like you do, it is a lot funner and satisfying than it is the old way.
Yeah.
And a lot healthier for the whole ecosystem.
Oh my gosh, for everything.
For everything. Yeah, including the farmer
That's
Yes.
right.
and his employees.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, is there anything that we didn't ask you that's critical to touch on while we have you with us?
I think we probably have touched on it, but here's the thing. I'm 66 years old, so I have to grow my trees profitably now. I don't have time to wait. But if you're 26 years old, you don't have time to wait either because farming is hard. And if you don't do it profitably, you will go out of business and you might lose that land. You don't want to lose that land. Land is very valuable and it's going to be more valuable as time goes on. So the land by itself is an investment and an asset that could make or break you when you're older just by owning it. But you have to be able to own it. So I suggest you look at soil health and pick the right crops to grow on the right farm. And pecans are not what you should grow on top of a hill. You know, there's crops for different places or animals for different places. Pick the ones that are going to do good there in the first place. Then study regenerative ag and soil health. And you, I think, will stand a very good chance of being successful.
Amen.
Right?
Yes.
Never stop learning.
Never stop learning. The funnest thing to do is to be in the orchard, and the second funnest thing to do is to be reading about what you could do to make it better.
Yes. I
And
agree.
we were just talking about not feeling like we have time to read the way we used to, and knowing how important it is to just stop and give yourself an hour a day to just sit down and read and absorb some of this stuff so that we can go out and make smart decisions and look at things holistically and kind of figure it out. But, everybody is so time starved. We need water and we need more time.
Exactly.
They're not making more of either one of them.
And you know what? Regenerative agriculture gives you both, because it is the same amount of time in the beginning, but the more you nurture the Mother Nature, she begins to help, and it doesn't take as much as it would conventionally.
It compounds.
Exactly.
And there's one other way that an old guy like me took too long to discover, and that is listen to podcasts like this. I listen to them all the time. Regenerative agriculture podcasts, science podcasts. Listen to these things, and even if you don't like what you're hearing, it's going to give you some ideas that might send you in the direction of something you will like. So I learn a lot from podcasts actually while I'm working in the orchard.
Yes.
Podcasts just like this.
Well, we are honored that you listen to our podcast. Truly, that just burst my heart when you said that. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. You do a good job. Real good job.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being with us, Troy. We appreciate you, and we love that you are right down the road from us and you get to share a Lockhart address. So we look forward to having you on our KLKT radio show soon.
All right. Well, I'll look forward to the invitation and take you up on it.
All right. I can't wait.
Connect with the Soil Sisters at txsoilsisters.co. Submit questions, guest or show ideas, and sponsorship inquiries. The Soil Sisters podcast was created and produced by Joanna Nuding. Editing and sound design are in the capable hands of the PodConnects Podcast Network.